I can buy a pack of these Plum Regal tomato seeds for about 40 cents a seed. And each plant that I grow from these 40-cent seeds will in turn produce about 20 pounds of tomatoes that I could take to my local organic market and sell for around $5 a pound, giving me $100 in cash for my initial upfront investment of 40 cents a seed. That's an incredible increase in value from such a small initial investment. So it's no wonder that so many people dream of quitting their job and earning some or even all of their income by growing and selling their own food. I've been down this path myself, and in this video I'm going to share part of a recent conversation I had with one of our Vegetable Academy members who's taken this same leap and now runs her own small market garden that she has built herself quite literally from the ground up. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Aiyana Jennings of Duncan, British Columbia, who appears to have found her happy place today as a vegetable grower.
I feel so very privileged right now because I feel like I'm almost living my ideal life, which sounds terribly idealistic, I know, but I feel really good about where I am right now. The caveat being that my husband unfortunately does not. And so my goal with all of this is to hopefully work this business up enough that he can at least move to his corporate job, at least part-time, so that he can enjoy this lifestyle with me. Like, feel like I've time for my kids now. I'm very busy all the time, but I love what I'm doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about what led you down this path to vegetable production and to the extent where you're actually growing so much that you're selling as well? Because it wasn't always the case. You've told me that you were a professional back in Calgary and there wouldn't have been nearly as much fresh food in your life then. What has led you down this path?
I think it was a mix of opportunity and a desire for a lifestyle change. It's just partly the way the pieces fell into place. We were offered this opportunity out here to farm on this land, which is my brother-in-law's property. And we were invited early on to join them out here. And so it opened up possibilities for us. So when my sister-in-law said, and we're considering, what it would be like to have a market garden on the property, it just got my mind going. I'm going, what if, what would that be like? Having grown up, as Jared mentioned, with a very large vegetable garden, I just, without realizing it, I took it for granted that we would always have all these yummy vegetables to eat. And I didn't realize until I got back into gardening how almost therapeutic. Don't kid yourself, market gardening is different. However, there are certain things from my childhood, like just the smell of certain vegetables, the soil, even the inoculant my mom used to put on the legumes. I would help her with that, and just the smell of things. And anyway, it excites me. I had been growing in a townhome complex, so I was growing as much as I could on our patio. It was a constant battle about where the furniture is going to go, where are we going to sit, and where are all the plants going to be. So I've always dabbled in it, but I'd never thought of doing it on this scale until this opportunity presented itself. That's where I started really doing the research and the reading and asking myself, does it look like something I would enjoy doing? Ultimately, I thought so, and so that's why we took the plunge.
Whenever you assess a new space for its growing potential, one of the first characteristics to consider is the light exposure. You can improve the existing soil, you can bring in water, but light access is sometimes very difficult to change, and it's absolutely essential for good vegetable production. So given that Aiyana's new property was covered with mature trees, it was critical for her to select a garden space that still had great sun exposure. Let's take a look now at how Aiyana has organized her new site and hear how the surrounding trees have impacted her planting decisions. This first little flyby will highlight just the aerial view of Aiyana's space, and we're looking at this spot right here. This is where you're making your new home. Can you tell us a little bit about the surrounding landscape that we're seeing here?
Well, the trees, absolutely. As I'm sure those of you that have been studying with Jared, he has pointed out the importance of sunlight to the garden, and the trees definitely affect how I plant and when I plant certain crops where. Although you will notice in the next picture, a lot of these trees in certain locations have now been taken down. So
yes, we're looking at,
yeah.
This is south, I believe.
Yes, and all those trees to the south there that are just on the other side, yeah, they look like they're a fair distance from the garden, but those trees are huge, and they actually shade a good portion of that top half of the garden, like half the year.
Yeah, you never think it, but by the time the sun gets low, especially in fall, like right now for you too, when you're trying to extend the season, all of a sudden these shadows are coming from nowhere. They weren't bothering you for the rest of the season, and here they're taking away this precious solar gain that you need to keep the season going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm even noticing, because this neighbor actually has since taken down some of the trees in that forest, but left the whole tree line is still there, but there are actually visible gaps now in it, where even those few hours where the sun comes through and all of a sudden, I've got sun again for a while, it actually does make quite a difference. So I'm a tree person. I love trees, and I was really sad to see them go, but I'm happy about the benefit I now get.
Okay, so let's go back onto the ground level here. We're going to talk about the upper beds, the middle beds, and the lower beds. Upper beds are up here, the middle beds, and then the lower beds. So that's what we're going to see on the ground. Here's your upper garden. Is there anything notable about this zone you'd like to point out?
Well, the trees, and you get a clear view of them now off to the south there. Yeah, in the summer, all of that is in full sun all the time, but it gets very low very quickly. So that really affects when I plant crops up there. I never start crops there early in the spring. Those are relegated to the middle garden area usually, and a little further down.
The second zone is the middle garden with the greenhouse and 3 beds that are running perpendicular to the rest of the beds here. But what's notable about this zone here?
Well, the most notable and obvious is that those 3 beds are running north-south as opposed to east-west. Initially, I was thinking that it was so much more important to have those beds running north-south. But in my scenario, after we discussed it, I'm not sure it makes a massive difference, just because, again, of where we're located. In the summer, the sun is so far overhead that it may not give me the advantage that it would give someone else. However, with trellised crops, it definitely is nice to have those beds running that way, which is why I did that.
Yeah, let me see
there.
Some of your trellises in this photo here. Do you intentionally try to get your trellis crops into these 3 zones then, as much as possible? Or
I tried previous season. This season, I decided to not. There were a number of decisions there. And I actually found it worked okay. You'll see another photo of my peas in the lower garden area. And they are all trellised, and there were 6 or 8 beds of them all in a row, and they all did fantastically. So in this particular case, I don't know if it makes such a huge difference. And for the crops behind them as well, I know that's the concern. Definitely later in the season, when I planted my carrots, my end of season carrots that are still on the ground right now, you can actually start to see patterns in the greens. So some of the greens are big, and then all of a sudden they'll get a little smaller, and then they get big again. And that's from shadow from a crop further up. Yeah. But during the summer, it doesn't seem to play that much of a role.
And then moving further down into your lower garden, where you've got 20 beds in a row that are all oriented east-west. You can see a more spread out view here. Does this zone take on any specific characteristics, or do you devote this space for any crops specifically because of the way it's set up in your space?
Yeah, I should mention that's a north-facing slope now coming down the hill, which makes it the ideal place to grow leafy greens in the summer. Because we get very hot, and it's very hard to grow lettuce and spinach and everything through the summer. And even I can't do it without some sort of shade protection. But this lower garden area here is, yes.
So that's sloped correctly down that way, yeah?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Then, you can see all the lettuces, and it also gets shade up until like 11 noon in the midsummer because of those trees there. Makes it a lovely place to work when it's 35 degrees. And it also means I can grow my lettuces a lot longer without them bolting.
From these first few photos, you probably recognized quite a few characteristics about Ayanna's garden that align with ours. The standard beds, the trellising, the row covers, the low tunnels, they all look pretty familiar. But one area where Ayanna's methods differ from our own is in her management of her pathways. I prefer to keep our pathways mulched or even bare, while Ayanna's pathways are green and very much alive. Let's hear how this choice is working for Ayanna so far and consider some of the strengths of living pathways. I'm really curious what she got to say about the grass pathways, because it feels like extra work for me, but maybe I'm missing something, and maybe there's a benefit that you're really starting to enjoy too, because I imagine the weeds aren't just springing up in that grass now that the grass is looking great. So tell us a little bit about your experience using grass as pathways.
I think it really is specific to your situation whether or not it will work for you. I've heard of farmers that have tried it and really don't like it. My sister-in-law tried it and she said, hell no. So she watched me with great interest when I started it. And the key is you have to be diligent about mowing every week. And even I fall behind. It does help that I have 2 boys that enjoy using the mower. So perfect garden task for them.
Yeah.
But if you can't commit to that every week, I can never do it more often in a week. We could probably handle twice a week in our high season, just the way stuff grows here. But if you can't commit to that, then living pathways, it just probably aren't for you. I really like them, but I have never tried the alternative. I don't know what it's like to try and maintain really clean, clear pathways. I kind of fell into these, I'll say, by accident. It was more that we arrived here, like we had just moved, and I was just starting to dig without really having thought about what I was going to do about the pathways. I thought, oh, I'll worry about that later. I'll just plant stuff in the ground and I'll figure out the pathways. But then I was listening to a podcast. I think it was probably Love and Fresh Flowers, I think. And she was just raving about the living pathways. And so I liked what she had to say about it. And I thought, well, I'm going to give it a go. And so I planned out the width of my pathways to accommodate a 19-inch mulching mower. I may have veered off a little bit. Okay. I usually require 2 passes down each pathway instead of just one. One would be ideal. But for benefits, one of the huge benefits, I think, is retaining the moisture in the garden, which for us, because we see drought out here, we can go as long as 3 months without hardly a drop of rain in the summer. And with my drip lines, I'm able to keep that garden area is looking so lush. And I believe all that moisture in the pathways is actually also helping to keep moisture in my garden beds. I also wonder if maybe it's helping to keep some of the things like slugs and other critters that would normally eat your veggies. I actually wonder if they're hanging out more in my pathways. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't have anything to support that theory other than I haven't had a real problem. I do sometimes have problems with slugs, but not to the degree that you would expect. And I do find them in the garden a lot. But my whole ecology in that garden, I've got everything in there. I see tons of snakes, which I love because then they're eating lots of bad things too. Yeah. Tons of frogs. Birds are in there all the time, but they don't seem to be harming any of my crops. So I don't want to sound idealistic because I know I've heard growers say, oh, I've just got this perfect harmony and everything just works out magically. And it's not quite that perfect. But sometimes I have to wonder, like, there's got to be a balance there because everything is in that garden all the time. And I don't know, I think the living pathways are part of that.
Are the pathway areas seeded with a regular lawn blend of grass seed, or is there clover in there and other species as well? What did you select?
I did not plant a thing.
Okay.
That is just what's grown in naturally. And yeah, you notice the lack of weeds. It's fascinating to see. It's mostly, depending where you are, it could be mostly clover or it could be mostly grass. And I love the clover because it attracts the bees. I was growing flowers in my garden to attract pollinators, but next year I don't think I will because I have so much clover that it's bee heaven in there. Until I mow it down.
And then one thing that I know is a challenge with grass is grass has a tendency to spread. So how do you keep it at bay? Has that been an issue at all, or has it just been part of your routine now and you've taught the grass where it needs to live and where it shouldn't be?
I wish. But I have gotten it into a bit of a routine with an edger. Believe it or not, when I started, I did not have an edger. And it's made a huge difference. I'm talking about just your old-fashioned hand tool. I got mine at Lee Valley. It's a very good sharp one you stand on. Okay. And I can edge a bed really quickly. You just go, right? And as long as I do that in the spring and in the fall, then it should not be an issue. It may look like it's growing over the beds, but if you actually take it and lift it up, that's just the length of the grass. It's not the...
So like, the roots are actually back here with just the tops of...
Yes.
Just because of the timing of this photo and stuff and when you're about to clean out the bed and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I purposely put it in there for that reason because it does look pretty scary. But I clear that bed really quickly also because of all the compost on that bed. I use mostly a no-till methodology, so the roots all come up really easy.
So this photo is after the previous one here, and it does look like they sure cleaned up pretty nice. And if that's just the process of walking along the edges with your edger to chop off the roots and pulling up any grass that might have wandered in a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah,
and then a layer of compost on top.
Compost on top as well.
Yeah, and I'll leave those beds now until the spring.
So grass for pathways so far has got a thumbs up from you?
It does.
Do it again?
Yeah, right now I'm pretty invested, as you can see. It would take a lot to clear that, and it does look gorgeous. Anybody that comes to the garden, says how beautiful it is. Which I know when you're market gardening, beauty can't be everything, but it sure makes it a nice place to come to work.
Yeah, especially in a state like this when if you didn't have the grass there, everything would just be totally barren. It is nice to still have that green around you. I'm curious though, since you mentioned having torrential rains occasionally, have you seen the grass do its work in terms of managing those huge surges of water too? Do you think that's a benefit?
Yes, that's good you mentioned that. I forgot about that one. Yeah. Yeah, I
Oh
think
yeah.
that absolutely makes a difference. Yeah.
And another benefit is that you're using more of this empty space to produce more carbon on your property, and then you can
Hmm.
then turn that into compost. Have you organized that process at all yet, or is that just something to come down the road?
That will be something to come, and it may be a few years down the road.
And I don't know if that's a
Just
significant amount of waste product that you got there from just the pathways or not, or does it feel like it's significant?
it's hard to say, honestly. I mean, yes, when I mow it down, sometimes I feel like I'm mowing down a forest, but
Yeah.
what that would amount to in compost land, I'm not 100% sure. I think before I went that route, I would gather the leaves on the property. We have so many maple trees with their huge leaves. It's just leaf mold just waiting to be used.
Another area of Ayanna's work that I found inspiring was her method of task management. If you have a home or market garden of any significant size, then I'm sure you've experienced periods of overwhelm when you just can't seem to keep up with the endless amount of tasks that are accumulating on your to-do list. Long lists like this can leave some of us frozen in a state of overwhelm, but we can't let scary things prevent our progress. We just need a way to work through our to-do lists in an orderly fashion without these feelings of overwhelm, and Ayanna may have the solution. I'm going to start off with trying to present some of this idea because as a Scrum rookie, maybe I'll use words that make more sense, but in general, on a market garden or just a big backyard garden, you've got like a seemingly endless list of tasks that you could do every day. You can walk through your garden and see all the jobs that kind of need to be done, but not all of them are the most important. Some of them can wait a month, some of them can wait till the end of the year, some of them are urgent. So how do we rank these tasks? How do we keep track of them? And how do we focus on the things that are most important? Because if we are just constantly looking at a list of to-do items that keeps piling up throughout the year and just randomly picking off things, then there are going to be things on that list that continue to nag us and slow us down in some ways. And we won't get a sense of progress. And yes, gradually the list of tasks completed will grow a little bit, but not in an orderly way. So Ayanna's presented to me this strategy that she started to use called Scrum. And what I think I understand right now is that it first of all ranks the tasks according to their level of difficulty, how long it's going to take, how much pleasure will come or not come from a certain type of job. And then you start to work your way through that task list based on a measurable quantity of work power or time that you've got to devote to working over a short period. So that's a sprint. And I think Ayanna's using 2 weeks. So she'll work on a certain number of these tasks for 2 weeks, assess her daily progress, keep doing it. And at the end of that 2 weeks, you really sit down and say, okay, what happened in that last sprint? What's still on my to-do list? Let's reassess and attack again. And then we do a sprint number 2, another 2-week period, and so on. And gradually, with this constant reassessment every 2 weeks, we work our way through this task list. We don't get overwhelmed. We stay focused on the small list, and our list over here grows in an organized fashion. That's my introduction. Tell me where I went wrong, and if there are points of clarification that are needed there, and how are you making this work so well in your gardening operation?
Yeah, I think you did a bang up job of explaining it. Honestly, yeah, that was that. Yeah, thanks for that nice introduction.
Okay.
I will add a couple of things, but you captured nicely the main points, which for me is that it gives me a way to prioritize and stay focused on the priority. As you mentioned, avoid the overwhelm because it gives me permission to ignore anything that is not in that sprint. That doesn't mean that it doesn't get looked at. I can be in the garden and see something and go, oh shoot, I should be thinning those crops. But I'm not going to go and thin them right then because my sprint says that I have these things to do. So then the thinning of whatever crop that would be would go then on my to-do, whether you want to call it a master list or an epic or whatever, if you want to use the Scrum terminology, it doesn't matter. But ultimately, whenever I'm in the garden and I see something that needs to be done, it just goes on that master list. But I don't worry about it in the moment unless it's in my sprint. With the exception of, you know, the deer comes into your garden and eats some of your crops and you have to patch the fence. But this is why ideally you would only budget roughly 80% of your time to allow for such proverbial fires to be put out. So yes, I start with that master list, and for me to make it kind of fun, because I don't really like to just sit down and plan. I'd rather be doing things. I go to the coffee shop, get a coffee, and I sit down. I force myself to stay there and enjoy my coffee until I've got my sprint finished. It usually takes me, I'll say, about an hour to figure out. Yeah. And so I don't have my master list up there, but all of these items came from my initial master list. And I'll get to the points in just a second. But as Jared mentioned, I've chosen a sprint length of 2 weeks. I find that works for me. So every 2 weeks on a Monday, before I do anything else, I go to the coffee shop, I sit down, and I plan my sprint. And at the end of the 2 weeks, ideally, everything would be done. But if it's not, then I reflect, okay, was that because I underestimated the value of that particular task or whatever you like? Or is it because I piddled away my time, wasn't doing things that I should have been doing? I assess, and then I decide in the future, should that particular item be given more points, or should I be not having as many points in my sprint? And so that would lead me into, how do you assign the points to
That's what I was going to ask. Great.
Yeah. And it again, if you're really interested, there is a podcast that really helped me. Mind you, I have a lot of prior knowledge about Scrum, just again, because my husband is a web developer, and this is where this whole methodology came from initially. But if Jared wouldn't mind sharing, it was the Growing for Market podcast.
Yeah, I already put it in the comments.
Perfect. Yeah, hopefully if you listen to that, if you're interested, that will also provide some clarification. But it's based on the Fibonacci sequence, the points that you assign, which is the sequence of numbers where the number is the sum of the two numbers preceding it. So in this case, we're only using 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And the next one, the sequence would be 21, but it doesn't matter what the numbers are. What's important is that you're budgeting what is right for you. So I would look at a task, and in that Trello list there that Jared had on screen, you can see some examples of what I would call a 3-pointer versus an 8-pointer. What else do I have? 2 pointers. Don't know if I have a really big one in there.
So why would something be like here, roll up drip lines is 2 points, but here, roll up drip lines in the lower garden is 8 points?
Yes. Because here's, I was more specific, and this is what you learn. This requires experience. So when you start, you just dive into it, give it a go. And after 2 weeks or a week, you would assess and then change things accordingly. But I got really specific. Okay, it's only beds numbers 13, 14, and 15. I'm rolling up drip lines. That's pretty quick. 3 beds, rolling up a drip line, 2 points. The entire lower garden of 20 beds is 8 points. But you notice that's not a multiple of. It's not like 20 beds is 4 times
3. Yeah, that would be 12 beds.
So there's a little bit of arbitrariness there, but there's also assessing how daunting a task is to you. If it's one of those tasks that you're just dreading and you keep putting it off, even if it won't necessarily be time consuming, you would assign it a higher point value. So it becomes a very personal thing as well. And what I do want to emphasize is it should not be tied to time. I think a lot of people initially think, oh, well, I want a 40-hour work week, so I'm going to budget 40 points per sprint. But that just defeats the whole purpose. Then you're back to, well, I'm just going to budget my time by the hour. And then what happens if something takes longer than it was supposed to, and it throws your whole plan off? This way, you're not focused on what I'm going to get done today. It's just I'm always working on the highest priority.
What becomes the highest priority? Is that the highest points at the top, or not?
No, that's where I sit at the coffee shop and I look at my list and I go, okay, what needs to be done? It could be, depending on the season too. If it's high planting season, it's really, the priority is going to be getting crops in at a certain time. So you yourself have to make that decision. Scrum is built for teams to work together with a lot of moving parts, but I'm just a one-man team right now. So I am everything, and this is only using a component of Scrum, but I really love it just because of the way my mind works. I'm not a list maker by nature, so it was a game changer for me in just avoiding the overwhelm. That was the big thing. And that satisfaction, Jared touched on it earlier, with being able to check off a task.
Yeah, like you get to see here all of your done list, which must be satisfying. Like this is a zoomed in version of what's on this screen here, and look how long the done task is. That's got to make you feel great at some point if you're your to-do list is shorter than your done list. At some point, that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't think that'll ever happen. But it really helps you stay on track, especially in a garden. I'm sure everybody can attest to the fact you go in there. For me, it's the worst if I have to harvest something for dinner. It's like I'm just popping up to the garden for dinner to get something, and then
yeah. But I could do that. But I could do that. Oh.
Yeah. It's the same when I'm working up there because it's, one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're not on task, and it's not satisfying because you weren't getting done the things that you really need to get done.
It's almost like giving yourself a boss when you don't have one, like someone to say, no, Aiyana, I didn't tell you to go set up that trellis today. I told you to go harvest the beans or whatever. Like, please stay focused.
Yes,
because otherwise,
I like that.
if you're the owner of the business or the master of the garden, you feel like everything's your responsibility. So therefore, everything is your role. So in your mind, you're not wasting time because you're wandering around the garden completing all these random tasks, but you aren't working very efficiently and focused if your imaginary boss isn't keeping you on track. So I see the value in this, and I'm really intrigued by the point system and the ranking of it all. This is in Trello, by the way, which is an online list making and organizing app, which has been great to work with. I've used it for some other things, so I encourage you to try it out, look into it some more. Thank you for the introduction. It's a big methodology to try to encompass in a small conversation like tonight, but I appreciate the introduction.
Yeah, I was anxious to share it because it's really made a difference for me and just in how I mentally tackle the garden, because that overwhelm was really threatening to to scare me.
And like as Aiyana said before, she was inspired by the Growing for Market podcast, and I've linked to that in the comments as well. So that'll give you a much longer explanation of how another grower has been using it as well, and maybe you'll be on the same track. Now, if everything has gone right in the garden to this point, we'll have created an organized and productive space in which we can work efficiently, and that will leave us with bountiful quantities of fresh produce with minimal labor. But that produce is only worth something if we eat it ourselves to cut down on our grocery bill or distribute the food throughout our community. So one final piece of the puzzle for Aiyana was marketing. Here are a few different ways that she's been able to connect with customers and earn an income from her time in the garden. Starting off with your website, how are you getting connected with your customers and how are you continuing that relationship?
This is an area that we definitely could improve on, but I also haven't really had to work on marketing a heck of a lot just because I've sold most of what I've grown. That said, we obviously are still doing some marketing. I'm fortunate. My husband is a web developer and he hasn't put a lot of time and effort into this website, but he did the website for me. So if you happen to know someone and it's because it's not your forte, then take advantage of that. But you can do websites pretty easily. And in today's world, the web is one of the first places I think people look. Yeah. And even for veggies now, I would have said a few years ago, well, no, nobody looks online for their vegetables, but COVID changed that. And so we play that to our advantage for sure. So yeah, there's the website, which you can see here. This is current. Our farm stand is closed for the season, but if people sign up for my newsletter, I send a newsletter out every week, just telling people what's available. And if they wish to place an order, they can, and I'll place it for them on the farm stand for pickup. During the summer, we have the farm stand open, and I always announce what's available. And yeah, the co-op, the online farmers market, is my main source of income right now.
Are you saying it's your main source of income right now because it's kind of getting into the fall season, or it was actually the main source of income all season long?
Actually,
okay.
Yes, all season, but especially right now, and especially because there are so few growers now putting their produce online at the moment. So basically anything I post sells really quickly.
Wonderful. So yeah. One of the perks of going through a middleman like this is that you often can reach a larger audience and have less trouble connecting with people. But one of the drawbacks is that a middleman will start to take a cut of the profit. So what's the difference there? Like, you still have your farm stand, and there's a perk there of being able to go direct to your customer, and everything they pay you at the farm stand goes to you. So what would you say about the differences here in terms of the cost and benefit of using this middleman? What's been your experience?
I would have to sit down and actually analyze that further, probably to give you a proper answer. I do know that if we were to be able to ramp up our special orders, we definitely, that would be to our advantage, because I have about 6 regulars that almost weekly place good sized orders. I would say that'll be one of my goals for next year, will be to try and increase that customer base. As for the online farmers market, I think, like all of these non-for-profit organizations, they struggle with funding. And so it's really hard to get the resources to get the marketing that we need. If we could get more marketing in there, I would say that even the cut would be worth it, because they do give me exposure, especially as a new grower. We moved out here, I knew nobody, almost nobody, and I just started growing stuff, and I was able to sell it because of this. So,
yeah, that's a great case for using a networking tool like this to get your name out there. It's just kind of the same benefit you get from moving to a place and then instantly joining the real life farmers market. Suddenly you're one of those people that is standing beside all the other farmers that have been there for 30 years, but since you're there, you're on equal terms all of a sudden.
yes.
Same thing here, but in the digital world, and you don't have to stand there beside your vegetables to have a presence. So
Yes.
good find, and it's great that you're in a community that has one of these programs already in place.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a few highlights from Ayanna's journey so far. Obviously, we're both passionate about growing good food and sharing it in our community, so our conversation was much longer than this, including subjects like site preparation, crop selection, and getting started with her new high tunnel, and members can find the full uncut recording in our classroom area. Now, can you see yourself following in Ayanna's footsteps? I know it's possible, but I also know it's not easy, and the story can end differently, especially if you don't have an experienced guide on your team. If you're keen to make the same leap into growing a serious amount of your own food, whether to feed your family or earn an income, then the best place to start is my free interactive workshop. There, I'll teach you the key breakthroughs we've had that enable us to grow our own year-round supply of vegetables, even in a cold climate. I'll hook you up with a few workbooks to help you start taking action, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this Seed to Table program. If that sounds good to you, you can find a link to the workshop in the description. That's all for today. I think it's fitting if Ayanna has the last word on this one. What would you tell someone that's about to embark on that same path?
The expression, they thought they could do it, so they did, comes to mind. You really have to believe you can do it. And if you do, you will.